What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I have an awesome video for you today where we go over the Iowa caucuses, the last day of 2019. And what we did was we looked at the Google search volume and the YouTube search volume to see who is actually the most interesting candidate to the American public, to see who has the most amount of search volume. So, with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, Happy New Year. It's good to freaking see you. Let's get into it. So, we took the Democratic candidates, we went over to Google Trends, and we put in each one of their names as a search term. So this way, Google owns YouTube, and they track all of the web search as well as the search on YouTube over the, in perpetuity, basically. Well, I think you can only go back about 5 years. But what we did is we took a look at the 12-month, the 3-month, and the 1-month to see who was number one at the 12-month, number one at the 3-month, and number one at the 1-month. And we stack ranked the candidates 1 through 11 in each one of those time periods before taking an average. And then we compared it to Real Clear Politics. So Real Clear Politics just aggregates polling data within the state of Iowa. So there's there's 4 polls here that they have, and then they try to extrapolate like who is the leading in Iowa. So we have one from Emerson, one from Iowa State University, one from CNN, and one from YouGov. And I took all of that together and put it into a spreadsheet. And the top 5 candidates are, we have a very close race here in Iowa. We have a tie between Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden. And then we have a 3-way tie for 3rd place between Bernie, Andrew, and Elizabeth. Super interesting, right? We have 2 ties in the top 5. That consumes all top 5 candidates. So let's dive into the numbers here. This is super interesting when I was going through this. So we'll start it here at Google before we compare it to the Real Clear Politics. What the ranking is 25% from the 12-month. So we take 25% of the score from the 365, 25% of the score from the 90-day, and 50% of the score for a total of 100% of the 30-day. And that's how we come up with the scoring, because 30-day is the most relevant information, and that's why it represents 50% of the score. And we can see here that Pete moved up over the last 90 days and 30 days significantly in Iowa. Andrew Yang moved up a little bit just more recently. We are actually going to be doing a post analysis. We're going to do like an ex ante versus ex post analysis, which just means before and after effect for Iowa. There's a bunch of YouTubers like Paget and Kai and a couple other names that are going to be in Iowa for about a week campaigning for Andrew Yang. So we're going to actually take a look at the Iowa search volume after they're there to see what that was like beforehand and what it was like afterwards. So if you want to follow along with that, make sure to press that subscribe button. If you guys have any comments, leave them down below. Use the hashtag STOLT so that at the end of the video when we get into our Q&A, we can actually talk about your comments, because you guys leave some really, really awesome stuff. This is probably the 4th or 5th time we've seen this over the last 2 weeks. Bernie Sanders tends to be losing ground. Not sure why. I'm not sure what's going on, if people just had enough of him, if other people are just gaining more attention. I'm not sure what's going on. He still ranks in the top 5 easily, number 1 in a lot of things. But just in the last 2 weeks or so, we've seen him starting to lose a little bit of that he's got such a tremendous following and awareness to his name that that seems to be tapering off slightly, or maybe that's staying constant, but everybody else is growing at a faster rate, which makes him seem like he's doing worse. I'm not sure which one of those it is yet, but he's on the national. We do national polls like this as well, so you can check out the channel if you want to see those, like the Google ranking or the YouTube ranking or the Facebook ranking or donations. We do all sorts of different rankings of the Democratic candidates based upon data, not just a poll of 1,000 people. We want to know millions of data points to understand what's actually going on. Biden's just been all over the place most of the time. He'll be up and down and up and down. He's much more he's one of the more volatile candidates. Elizabeth Warren also seems to have a decent amount of volatility. Probably similar to Joe Biden. Probably fairly similar, but her volatility tends to be in the second half of the top 5, where Joe's is in kind of like the middle of the top 5. So she tends to not rank quite as well as Joe on average. But we're just looking at Iowa. Tulsi Gabbard, middle of the pack, losing ground here. She went from 6th to 7th. Tom Steyer is stepping it up. So he's getting more name recognition from all the ads that he's running. That's how it works, right? You're paying to distribute your message to more people. So whoever your candidate is that you're trying to help or you want to help, if that's your thing, telling their message, whether that's just telling friends, whether it's campaigning, whether it's like doing some type of like phone banking or texting or making a YouTube channel or posting about it online, getting your candidate's message out is literally probably one of the biggest things that you can do to help your candidate, whoever that might be. Let's jump over to the YouTube search volume. The scoring for the YouTube is exactly the same. So 25% from 12 month, 25% for 3 month, 25 or 50% from the 30 day. We see that Pete does not have nearly as much relevance on YouTube. So these are the 2 biggest sites on the planet. Andrew Yang does a lot better on YouTube than he does on Google, which is interesting. Pete's been like up and down a little bit on YouTube. Andrew Yang's been consistent across the board. What's kind of interesting here is Joe Biden jumped at the 365 third down to first for the 90 and 30. But what's even more interesting on YouTube, so we just saw on Google, Bernie's losing a little bit of steam, right? On YouTube, which Bernie has probably, I think out of all these candidates here, Bernie has the largest YouTube channel, I believe. I think he's got around 300,000 subscribers. And he's been like, I feel like one of the top 3 to 5 candidates who's been consistently putting out content for a longer period of time because that builds brand equity. And the interesting thing is he went from 1st to 6th. So he's either losing steam or maintaining his steam, and everybody else is growing significantly faster than him. One of those 2 things. Because when you go from 1st to 6th, that type of drop we don't see too often in these rankings. You know, that's kind of interesting that we see so much losing ground for that. Let's come down here. Cory Booker. Elizabeth Warren moved up a little bit on YouTube, so whatever she's doing is working. Just keep doing that, Elizabeth. It seems to be working for you. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, you got to step it up, bro. Step that shit up. You're losing ground. Julian, we're just going to skip over Julian. He's not doing anything. Tom Steyer, interesting fellow. I'm curious to see how Tom, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Michael Bloomberg, how those 4, because do we only need like one old fucking white dude? I don't know. But those 4, I feel like a lot of the people who are on that cusp of like, there's a bunch of people who actually give a shit about politics. I don't pay attention to like what any of these candidates say. So there's a lot of people who actually do care what they say. Then there's a large portion of the population who doesn't give a fuck. They're like, he's not going to do anything about my life. Why do I give a shit, right? And then there's a large portion of the population who's like kind of slightly, maybe a tiny bit paying attention to it, right? So if Tom or Michael or Bernie or Joe is able to get their message in front of more people, this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because Tom was tied with Bernie at the 90 day on YouTube. And Tom does not have a big YouTube channel. And then from there, he went up to 3rd. So Tom is really doing something that's working to jump all the way up to 3rd spot. That's a lot. To be in the top 3 on YouTube search volume, that's a lot. That's tremendous. He's doing whatever he's doing is clearly working. He's moving up. His message, his distribution, whatever he's doing is connecting with people, and he has been gaining ground. Bloomberg's also been gaining ground, but he hasn't been doing it for as long, so it'll be interesting. I could see both of them pulling potentially the rug out from underneath Joe Biden if the mainstream media actually pays attention. but more than likely the mainstream media is just going to be like, oh, it's Joe Biden's the person. You know what I mean? And then the overall score is just 50% of the Google ranking and 50% of the YouTube ranking. So let's jump over here to the macro view. Interesting. Pete has been, so this is the overall ranking in Iowa. Pete has moved up from 5th to 1st. So from mid-November to the end of the year, he's moved. This data is as of the 27th. Today's the 31st. Happy freaking New Year, if that's your thing. Andrew Yang has also moved up in Iowa. He's in the top 3. Interesting. They're both moving up kind of like in tandem, but it looks like Pete has had a little bit more attention there. I believe Pete has also had more mainstream media coverage. Bernie Burns. Look at this. Bernie was number 1 since we started these rankings back in September, all the way up until the early part of December, and he just dropped 2 spots to 3rd. Joe Biden, as we said, has been a little bit volatile, but in the last 2 rankings that we've done in December, he has been number 1. So he was tied with Bernie. Bernie lost ground. Joe stayed. He had that staying power. And Pete came up to join him in the 1st spot. But let's take a look at these 3 players. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Andrew Yang. So Pete and Joe are tied, right? And they had both been gaining ground since we've been doing these over the last like month and a half, 45 days. But Andrew Yang, and we're going to try to see where we think this might go for the next time we do this. And the YouTubers for Yang Gang are going to be out there in early January, so we're going to do this again in early January. So make sure you press that subscribe button. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, and use the hashtag STOLE so we can get into our YouTube analytics and answer your questions at the end of the show. But we can see here that 2 of the people are gaining. Over the whole entire period, Andrew Yang has been gaining, right? This 45 days. And we could go back further and say that Andrew Yang is not, but a lot of times I'll look back at like the last 3 just to see if I can try to come up with some type of trend. Bernie looks like he's losing. Elizabeth Warren has come back to, she's moved up 2 spots, which is good, to be tied at 3rd. So the only person that we could probably say might potentially continue to do this, if we had to like place money on it and we were just looking at this data, we would say that probably Andrew Yang could potentially continue, right? The momentum that he's been building over the last 45 days, he's continuing to grow, right? So we could see that continue, potentially, right? That's what the data is pointing us. Bernie Sanders, as I alluded to earlier, not only in some of the state rankings, but in the national rankings, Bernie is just slipping just a little bit. So if I were to guess, I would say Bernie would be the person who would maybe stay or lose more ground unless something changes. And Elizabeth is hard to say, right? Because there's no clear delineation in either direction. She did gain over this last period from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. We'll see. I could see her potentially staying or moving up potentially. But the 2 biggest that there's more clear data for me would be Bernie Sanders, and I think that he would either maintain or lose, potentially, unless something shifts, right? And Yang, just based upon the other stuff I'm seeing, and the trend that we see here from 6th to 4th to 3rd, is he losing ground in the sense that the steam, because he moved 2 spots and then 1 spot, but we look at Bernie, he's losing 2 spots. So I could see Bernie taking out of the top 3. Maybe Elizabeth stays in there, and Andrew Yang moves up to 2nd or tied for 1st. I'm not sure. It looks like Pete's had a lot of good momentum, right? He went up 2 spots, and then he went up 2 spots again. And Joe did the same thing, and he's been maintaining at the top. So I don't know exactly what's going on there. I do see Joe gaining momentum in other areas where I see Pete pretty flat. So if I was trying to guess and just conjecture where Pete might be going, I could see Pete potentially either just maintaining or slipping into that 2nd spot. And battling with Andrew Yang for that 2nd spot. But be super interesting to tell. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. We're about to get into the Q&A, but first, let's take a look at our Real Clear Politics. So this is just the ranking from Real Clear Politics. We just take this across here, right? And this is their ranking. And we want to see who has the who is off by the most on Real Clear Politics versus like reality. So we see, I'm just going to draw your attention to a couple people here. Basically, anybody who's 3 spots are off by more or more, and there's 2 things that happen here, right? So we have 3 people who are off by a lot. Where actually these 2 of them don't really matter too much, but Amy and Corey don't really matter too much because they're not super relevant. But according to Real Clear Politics, they're 5th and 6th. So what does this and Andrew Yang is number 8th in terms of Real Clear Politics, the polling aggregation. So what does that do? Well, it does one of 2 things. First, on the one side, it helps Amy and Corey be more relevant than they actually are. So maybe they get a little bit more talking time from the mainstream media, because according to Real Clear Politics is saying they're doing better than they actually are, right? So that's one thing. It helps them out. But then on the other side of that, it takes that away from Andrew Yang because nobody's talking about him. And they're off by 5 spots when it comes to Andrew Yang. Kind of interesting. Another couple notables here are Joe Biden, Tulsi Gabbard, and Julian Castro. Again, none of these guys are, well, Joe Biden's doing pretty decent. They have him at 3rd, and he's actually 1st. You know, Tulsi's off by 2 spots. She's at 7th. They have her in 9th. So these things, they play out the same for all of these, because the mainstream media will look at Real Clear Politics and talk about that, or the study, the polling that comes out of there, when it might be 400 fucking people who respond to a poll, and they're saying that's representative of all people who live in Iowa or nationally. Anita Yang, what's good, Anita Yang? I appreciate the comment, and happy freaking New Year's. I wonder why Andrew Yang, AY, gets more donations from CA and New York, considering New York is his home state. Is New York his home state? Let me know down below in the comments. Use the hashtag Stolt. It could be. I thought he lived in California, but I'm not exactly 100% sure because I don't follow the candidates super closely. I think one that the reason is just pretty simple, in the sense that, like, if you look, California has like 30 or 40 million people in the population who live in the state. So if that's more than 10% of the entire population of the country in one state. So there's going to, from a dollar point standpoint, they're going to raise more money in that state just because that's where more than 10% of the population is. And it's probably a similar case for New York, but I don't have any context to know where they actually live or how they're campaigning, or where they have maybe like a big person that's supporting them in either one of these states. Awesome comment though. Super curious to see when the data comes out for the new donations, because we also have a donations ranking if you want to check it out on the channel. The next comment is from Springcraft Gamers. What's good? I hope you have an awesome holiday. I just uploaded my first video on Yang. Cool, awesome, kudos. My channel is Woodfire Power. If you guys want to check it out, look at Woodfire Power. He uploaded his first video on Andrew Yang. Hope you all the success, my man. And the video is Ross and Aries US Tour Episode 1. Oh, Ross, you're going to travel across the country. You had mentioned that. Keep me posted, man. I will be traveling across the country as well, starting in 2020. So thank you so much for the comment, Springcraft Gamer. We have one more comment from Springcraft Gamer, and this is from Russ. Stick to the U.S. for long-term consistency. If states only first 4 matter. Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and what's NV? I don't know. All other states follow the lead for the first 4 because people only study candidates close to their state's election date. True. I think that you're on something here, Russ. I appreciate the level of thought that you take in terms of how you analyze things, because I'm very similar in the way that I look at things. And there's also a psychological or sentimental effect of this, because even though Iowa is pretty irrelevant, the only reason people actually talk about Iowa is because it's number 1 and the media wants something to talk about. So they will project and say that that's happening in Iowa and kind of like push that across the rest of the country. It's like, oh, this is what's happening in Iowa. This must be happening in every other state, right? Just like polls, right? You have a poll of 1,000 people and they'll just say that's representative of the country when it's a fucking 1,000 people. Many just follow the leaders and let the lead states vote for surprising candidates. Yang will be a surprise to many, so expect unusual surge in February 4th nationwide. I'm super curious to watch how this plays out. I've never paid attention to politics, and to see the diversity of the candidates who are running for president is very interesting. I think with the internet and the ability to get their message out at such a low cost was not something that was ever possible in the past. And now with the internet, with YouTube, with Facebook, with Twitter, with Instagram, with all these different platforms that allow people to distribute their message for free, we can get a much more diverse opinion of what's happening, and potentially like have a better quality candidate that rises to the top. So I'm super curious to watch how this plays out. I appreciate everybody for watching. Happy freaking New Year's. Jump over to Instagram or TikTok. I've crossed over 1.3 million views on TikTok. So if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description. I appreciate you guys. Happy New Year's.